So let me throw one more layer on top of the Ukraine story,
Go for it.
because I don't talk a lot about the conflict itself for exactly what I said. There's just it's so supercharged again, that it's just not worth it for my mission on Twitter. And whereas with the vaccines, it was, I was willing to give my whole freaking life to that, man, because it was so wrong what was going on. I
Yeah.
knew I could prove it and blah, blah, blah. Ukraine doesn't have that value to me. So I just sort of stay away from it. But I will tell you one side that is so frustrating to me that it's not interjected. So I just mentioned to you the information, how we can't talk, really troubles me enough that it makes me question the whole freaking conflict. I'll be frank with you. And it's kind of like the myocarditis concern. It's not a huge number statistically. And if you'd let us talk about it, it may not be a big deal, but because you won't let us talk about it, it's the biggest deal in the vaccine world.
Yeah.
And so same thing with Ukraine. Maybe everything is on board in this, that, and the other, but the fact you're smothering us with such a coercive chilling effect, we can't even talk, starts to turn me against you, even if you might have the right cause. With that as the backdrop, we can't be dismissive of these realities. And those realities are, everybody thinks we had a hand in the coup that ultimately led to Zelensky being installed. Okay. And I'm not saying we installed Zelensky. I'm saying everybody was the wrong term. There's a lot of talk that America had a strong influence in the coup that ultimately led to Zelensky being installed. I believe that's just a factual statement. I'm not saying I can prove that. The US doesn't admit to its roles in coups, but we play in elections around the world. And it's funny when we talk about the end of the world of like, oh my God, Russia tried to muddle in our elections. You mean like the US has done in every one for the last 100 years?
I view the United States, and I mean, I don't know if it's just the United States, but it's an empire of another form that has client states, and we have businesses and agents of various sorts and
Oh yeah.
NGOs that are
And
there to help manage our clients.
absolutely. And we've straight up overthrown governments and shit. I mean, people don't talk about it a lot, but there's actually documented history of the CIA, of the federal government of America going down in South America and Central America and shit, and single-handedly changing regimes.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it just happens. But anyways, where I was going with that is some of the facts that trouble me in Ukraine are the following. Number one, there appears to have been involvement in America that led to this regime change. Again, I'm not saying we went and caused that. I'm just saying there seems to be American hands involved in that chapter. Okay. So that's fact one. Fact two is Joe Biden has been heavily involved in Ukraine for a long, long time. A history that goes back to what? What are we talking about? 2008, 2012, something like that. Fact two. Another fact, fact three, Joe Biden's son worked at Burisma. Burisma is the gas giant of Ukraine. It's huge. Fact four, Ukraine was widely discussed as the most corrupt nation in the West for a long time. It wasn't an offensive thing to say. It was the most corrupt nation in the West. And it was kind of just openly talked about that. We all knew that. But all of a sudden, when this chilling effect came in, we aren't allowed to talk about that anymore. Everything blue and yellow, again, is Mother Teresa. So Zelensky, we're supposed to think everything's great. While Sean Penn flies over there and gives Oscars on camera and it's promoted like a fucking movie, we're supposed to believe everything's great. But 18 months ago, we talked about this country as an absolute cesspool of corruption, okay? A lot of that corruption centered around what? Burisma. Surprise, surprise. Where Hunter Biden, the vice president of America's son, is sitting on the board there, and if my understanding is correct, was being paid $1 million a month. I know he was at least paid millions, plural, from Burisma. I could be wrong on the million a month figure, but he got millions of cash from Burisma. Do you know what he did for Burisma? Absolutely fucking nothing. He sat on the board of directors as Joe Biden's son, okay? That alone is enough of a red flag to be like, that bothers me. What was Hunter doing there? Why did Burisma want to pay him millions? Does it somehow involve Joe? Okay. We then have that video where he openly says to a crowd full of people that he leveraged $1 billion of loan something money to Poroshenko or whatever at the time and told him, if you don't fire the prosecutor by the time we get on the plane at 6 o'clock tonight, you will not get the billion. And he says, well, you don't have that authority. And he says, call Barack. And the whole crowd laughs. And he says, and wouldn't you know it, son of a bitch, or I'll be damned, or something like that. Before he get on the plane, he calls me and they had fired that prosecutor. What was the prosecutor investigating? He was investigating corruption at Burisma. Okay. We're not even allowed to talk about this in American society. There's not CNN coverage or ABC, CBS, CBC. None of the outlets will touch this shit. But the reality is everything I just told you is factually true. Yeah. So the prosecutor was investigating Burisma, the company that ends up paying his son millions to do nothing but be his son. They're investigating corruption at Burisma. what we are told on that, the surface level spin, because I'll be honest with you, Jeffrey, we don't even get beyond the very surface on this story in our media anywhere. No one will talk about it. The surface level spin of that is, oh, they were investigating corruption at Burisma before Hunter's time. I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that Burisma has been corrupt for a real long fucking time. Okay. But you don't need to worry about the story that we're told is, oh, well, they were investigating Burisma before Hunter Biden was ever involved. And the reason that they had the prosecutor fired is he was actually the corrupt prosecutor, and they needed to install a good one. It's the classic propaganda 101, where we're going to tell you we did, you know what I mean? Accuse the other side of that which you've actually done. Oh, we had to fire the corrupt prosecutor. Well, that may be true. I'm not saying I know this. These next parts aren't facts. They're my own theories. I'm not saying I know that that story is not true, but I believe more likely in those factual computers we talked about that Biden may have been influencing with $1 billion to fire a prosecutor who actually was investigating his own son. Yeah. And then more importantly than that, isn't that what Donald Trump ultimately faced a full impeachment for? Was a phone call where he said, if you don't do what I want you to do, you're going to get money. He went to fucking impeachment for that. And we can't even get a story on CNN. Why did Joe Biden have that prosecutor fired? Why was leveraging $1 billion not an impeachment worthy thing if Donald Trump's phone call was? I mean, that just, and I get it, it's different. They claim he wanted them to muddle in the election, right? That's how they made it different. But the point is, it's not that different of a fact pattern. And I'm not saying Joe Biden needs to be impeached for it. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying if on the end of the spectrum is impeachment, way before we get to the left side of the spectrum is some sort of freaking news coverage, isn't it? And we can't even get the news coverage on that story. So you ask me, what is my thoughts on Ukraine? Well, when I look at the military stuff and who's right and wrong, it appears to be Ukraine's right, Russia's wrong. I get why we're supporting it. There's a massacre going on and awful things are happening to the Ukrainian people. But I'm not able to talk about this topic once again, just like vaccines, which tells me something is wrong. And then I've got a decade and a half long history of our current sitting president when he was in vice president that involves corruption at a multi-billion-dollar gas giant, a fired prosecutor leveraged with $1 billion of U.S. funds, the vice president's son being paid millions of dollars to simply hold that name while being on a board. And let's mix in the last fact, the laptop. The laptop has information about all this shit. It talks about money. It talks about money from Burisma, cash from Ukraine, all types of shit, right? And we had our entire deep state federal apparatus come in before the election and tell us that was Russian disinformation. They had 60-some former IC officials sign a letter saying it had all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation because, like a George Orwell novel, they told us the lie was truth and the opposite was disinformation, and the entire country just moved on. They now admit that the laptop was true. Like we talked about earlier, we can't talk about the contents. They won't talk about the contents at all, but they admit it's true 2 years later after all of our media said it was false. Well, guess what's on that laptop? A whole bunch of discussion about money in Ukraine and Burisma and Hunter Biden. And there's even a comment in there about 10% for the big guy. And we can't even get coverage about this. So when you weave that in with how corrupt Ukraine was in the past, how billions are going over there like a fucking hole in the water with almost no tracking and responsibility for what's happening. Afghanistan shut down where billions were being poured by the defense industry. Boom, Ukraine opened up where billions are being poured by the defense industry. We're getting almost no responsibility for that. I don't trust Zelensky as far as I could throw him. The guy looks like he's made out of plastic to me. He's a former actor. There's this bizarre clip out there of him in this LGBTQ plus movie wearing heels and leather pants and this, that, and the other, and doing this weird sexual dance and shit. And he's been in these weird movies with machine guns shooting up courthouses. And I'm not saying any of that's wrong. I wasn't bashing him for wearing tight leather pants and women's heels and dancing in a music video. I'm simply saying that's his background. This isn't some great politician of times past. You see what I'm saying? This is literally a former actor, an actor who is speaking at Stanford, speaking at our Ivies at their graduation ceremonies, talking about misinformation, allowing to speak at our Oscar Awards, coming to the White House. He is like the epitome of the Truman Show. We aren't allowed to question him. We are only required to worship him. We are all required to worship him. If you don't, you're a Putin stooge and an abhorrent monster. And motherfucker, it feels exactly like it was with the vaccines, Jeffrey. And so I've reached a wall with Ukraine where they're about to lose me on the whole front, because they won't even talk about what I just laid out to you. And all of that is directly relevant to Joe Biden himself sending billions of dollars to frickin' Ukraine, right? So if you want to give me some media coverage of this, then maybe I'll get much more on board with the conflict. But if it continues in this trajectory, they're going to lose me completely. And that's not because I don't have sympathy for the Ukrainian people. Of course I do. But we aren't the world's police who have to go and solve every single war. I don't want nuclear war with Russia, right? So that's a huge decision to make. And I can tell you one thing, I will not support it as long as you won't even answer these basic questions like, why the hell did Joe Biden have that prosecutor fired? What's on the laptop, guys? Right? I'll step off the soapbox.